I'm Sarah, 29 years old, and I just witnessed my father torch $38 million right in front of our entire extended family. My grandfather, Benjamin Morrison, who had been more of a father figure to me than my actual dad ever managed to be, had left me his entire fortune in his will. The expression of absolute fury on my father's face as he grabbed that oversized ceremonial check and ignited it with his vintage Zippo lighter is burned into my memory forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Yet there I sat, completely calm, wearing the smallest hint of a smile that seemed to perplex everyone in that oak-paneled room even more than the dramatic destruction they'd just witnessed. Growing up as a Morrison in our small Connecticut town meant carrying a certain weight of expectation. My grandfather, Benjamin Morrison, wasn't merely wealthy in the traditional sense. He had constructed Morrison Industries from absolutely nothing except raw determination, strategic thinking, and an almost supernatural ability to read people's true intentions. While the rest of our community saw the sprawling estate, with its tennis courts and indoor swimming pool, the fleet of classic cars in his garage, and the way restaurant owners would personally greet him by name, I experienced something entirely different. I knew the man who would drive 40 minutes out of his way every Thursday evening just to take me to the small ice cream parlor that made hand-churned vanilla with real Madagascar beans, where we'd sit on the same corner booth talking about everything from my school projects to my dreams of maybe someday traveling to places I'd only seen in National Geographic magazines. Benjamin had this particular way of making a 7-year-old feel like the most important person in the entire world. He'd lean forward across that red vinyl table, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup that the waitress never let go empty, and he'd ask me questions that adults rarely bothered with. What did I think about the new playground equipment at school? Which book was I reading, and what made the main character interesting? If I could change one thing about our town, what would it be and why? These weren't the superficial questions most grown-ups ask children. Benjamin genuinely wanted to understand how my mind worked, what sparked my curiosity, what made me frustrated or excited. Those Thursday evenings became the foundation of everything I understood about genuine connection between people. We'd walk through downtown afterward, and he'd point out different businesses, explaining how each one served the community in its own way. The hardware store that had been family-owned for 3 generations, where you could still get advice on fixing almost anything. The bookstore where Mrs. Patterson would order any title you requested, even if it took months to arrive. The small law office where Mr. Chen helped people navigate complicated paperwork without charging fees that would bankrupt working families. Benjamin taught me that success wasn't about accumulating possessions or impressing people you didn't particularly like. Real achievement meant creating something meaningful that would continue benefiting others long after you were gone. Even at 8 years old, I'd nod solemnly while chocolate chip cookie crumbs scattered across my school uniform, somehow understanding that he was sharing something profound with me. Sometimes we'd drive out to the construction sites where Morrison Industries was developing new residential neighborhoods. Benjamin would walk me through the process of choosing locations, designing layouts that preserved existing trees wherever possible, ensuring that families of different income levels could find suitable homes in the same community. He'd quiz me on concepts that probably should have been too advanced for my age group but somehow weren't. What makes a neighborhood feel safe and welcoming? How do you balance business profitability with social responsibility? Why might it be important to include parks and walking paths in residential planning? My father, Michael Morrison, existed as a complicated shadow that fell across these bright memories. As Benjamin's only son, Michael had been provided with every possible advantage. The finest private schools, where tuition cost more than most people's annual salaries. Connections to influential families and business leaders. Startup capital for multiple entrepreneurial ventures. A position in the family company that came with an impressive title and corner office, before he'd proven himself capable of handling the responsibilities. Yet none of these gifts ever seemed sufficient for Michael. His businesses would show initial promise under Benjamin's careful guidance and financial backing, then inevitably collapse when he'd ignore strategic advice and make impulsive decisions based on ego rather than market analysis. I remember hiding at the top of our mahogany staircase when I was 11, listening to Michael's voice echoing from Benjamin's study below, thick with alcohol and resentment. "Nothing I accomplish will ever measure up to your impossible standards," he was shouting, and I could hear the clink of ice cubes against glass. "You hand me these opportunities just to watch me stumble and fall short." Benjamin's response came in that measured tone I knew so well. "Michael, I provide opportunities because you're my son and I believe in your potential, but you undermine yourself every single time. The Riverside project failed because you didn't thoroughly research the environmental impact studies, not because I set unrealistic expectations." "And I suppose precious little Sarah would have read every single page of those reports," Michael spat back. "Your perfect granddaughter, who apparently can do no wrong in your eyes." That conversation marked the first time I truly understood that my father didn't just feel overlooked or underappreciated. He actively resented my relationship with Benjamin, not simply because of the attention I received, but because of the genuine respect that had developed between my grandfather and me over years of authentic connection. My mother, Catherine Morrison, tried her best to navigate these treacherous family dynamics. A former museum curator who had fallen in love with the charming son of a successful businessman, she hadn't anticipated the level of dysfunction that would define our household. Catherine possessed this remarkable ability to maintain elegant composure during family gatherings that threatened to explode into open conflict. She'd guide conversations toward neutral topics, compliment Michael's achievements when he needed encouragement, and somehow prevent holiday dinners from deteriorating into shouting matches. "Your father loves you deeply," she'd whisper to me after Michael missed another swim meet or school performance, usually because he was at some bar drowning his latest professional disappointment. "He simply doesn't know how to express his feelings appropriately." Even as a child, I could distinguish between absence and deliberate avoidance. Michael wasn't just busy or distracted. He was actively choosing not to participate in my life because my successes somehow highlighted his own perceived failures. Catherine maintained her own cordial but somewhat formal relationship with Benjamin. He respected her intelligence and cultural knowledge, frequently consulting her about art acquisitions for the corporate offices, and inviting her to gallery openings and cultural events around the city. It was obvious that Benjamin considered Michael extremely fortunate to have married someone of Catherine's caliber and sophistication, which only intensified Michael's feelings of inadequacy. When Michael's drinking became more problematic during my teenage years, Catherine developed elaborate strategies to shield me from the worst episodes. She'd arranged for me to spend weekends at Benjamin's lake house when Michael went on extended benders that could last for days. Those escapes became crucial sanctuaries where I could breathe freely without the constant tension that permeated our main residence. The lake house represented everything Benjamin valued about life. Simple but elegant furnishings that prioritized comfort over ostentation. Floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the natural beauty of the surrounding forest and water. A wraparound porch where we'd sit with morning coffee, watching deer emerge from the tree line to drink at the lake's edge. Benjamin had designed the house himself, choosing materials that would age gracefully and blend harmoniously with the natural environment. During those weekend retreats, Benjamin would teach me practical skills that my expensive private school education somehow overlooked. How to identify different species of birds by their calls and flight patterns. The proper technique for building a campfire that would burn safely and efficiently. How to read weather patterns by observing cloud formations and wind direction. These lessons felt more valuable than any classroom instruction I'd ever received. My educational choices eventually became another source of family conflict. Michael insisted I pursue liberal arts studies, something he considered appropriate for someone who would eventually marry well and focus on social responsibilities rather than career ambitions. Benjamin never pushed me toward any particular academic direction, but he asked thoughtful questions about my interests and natural aptitudes that helped me discover my own preferences. When I chose to study business administration and economics, Michael didn't speak to me for nearly 4 months. "Following in the old man's footsteps," he'd mutter sarcastically when forced to acknowledge my presence at family functions. How remarkably original. What neither Michael nor anyone else realized was that I'd made this decision completely independently. I had discovered a genuine fascination with business strategy, market analysis, and organizational psychology through my own research and exploration. The fact that my interests aligned with Benjamin's field was coincidental. though I had to admit that our years of conversations had sparked my initial curiosity about how successful enterprises actually functioned. After graduating with highest honors, I surprised everyone by declining Benjamin's offer to join Morrison Industries in a management trainee position. Instead, I accepted an entry-level role at Sterling Financial Group, a respected competitor firm where I'd have to prove myself without any family connections or special treatment. I need to establish my own credibility and capabilities, I explained to Benjamin during one of our Thursday evening ice cream traditions, which we'd maintained even after I'd become an adult. I want to know that any success I achieve is based entirely on my own merits. Benjamin smiled with unmistakable pride. That's precisely the kind of thinking that would make you invaluable at Morrison Industries, but I completely respect your decision. Build your own foundation first. What I didn't discover until much later was that Benjamin had been quietly tracking my professional progress through industry contacts and trade publications. Every promotion I earned, every successful project I completed, every positive mention in business journals. He knew about all of it, carefully collecting newspaper clippings and newsletter articles about my accomplishments, like a proud parent documenting a child's achievements. My younger brother Jake approached family dynamics from an entirely different angle. 3 years my junior, he'd aligned himself with Michael's perspective early in his adolescence, perhaps calculating that this path offered the least resistance and maximum immediate benefits. Where I questioned Michael's dismissive attitudes and challenged his assumptions, Jake simply mirrored them. Where I insisted on earning my achievements through hard work and persistence, Jake leveraged the Morrison name and connections to secure shortcuts and favorable treatment. "You're making everything infinitely more complicated than necessary," Jake told me after I'd refused his suggestion to let him arrange an introduction with one of Michael's business associates who could fast-track a promotion at Sterling Financial. "Why struggle up every single rung of the ladder when you could take the express elevator to the top floor?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "Because I want to understand each step thoroughly," I replied firmly. "When I eventually reach senior positions, nobody will be able to question my qualifications or suggest I didn't earn my place legitimately." Jake rolled his eyes with the exaggerated exasperation that had become his signature response to what he perceived as my unnecessary principles. "You sound exactly like Benjamin with all that integrity nonsense. The business world operates on relationships and strategic networking, not some idealistic fantasy about merit-based advancement." The growing philosophical divide between my brother and me reached its breaking point approximately 4 months before Benjamin's health began declining. Jake had been discovered misappropriating company resources for personal expenses at the Morrison Industries division, where Michael had secured him a middle management position, despite his complete lack of relevant experience or qualifications. When the internal audit uncovered irregularities in travel expenses, entertainment budgets, and equipment purchases, Jake expected family solidarity to protect him from consequences. "Family members protect each other," he hissed at me in the hospital parking lot after we'd both visited Benjamin following his first minor stroke. "That's what loyalty means in the real world. Not when protecting someone requires compromising my own integrity," I responded evenly. "And definitely not when it means enabling behavior that damages the company Benjamin spent decades building." "Always the perfect granddaughter?" Jake sneered, his voice dripping with resentment that had been building for years. "Must be incredibly convenient to be the obvious favorite who can do absolutely no wrong." I watched him storm away toward his expensive sports car, a graduation gift from Michael that cost more than most people's annual salaries, wondering when exactly we'd become such strangers to each other. The truth was that I'd never requested special treatment or favoritism from anyone. I simply wanted the freedom to be authentic, to earn recognition based on my actual contributions and capabilities. If that approach happened to align more closely with Benjamin's values than with Michael's expectations, it wasn't a calculated strategic choice. It was just who I was at my core. The phone call that changed everything came on a drizzly Wednesday morning in November. I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk when Catherine's number appeared on my screen, her voice tight with barely controlled panic when I answered. "Sarah, it's about Benjamin. You need to come to Hartford General immediately." My quarterly analysis forgotten, I grabbed my keys and raced across town through morning traffic that seemed deliberately designed to test my patience. Benjamin had suffered a massive stroke during his regular morning walk around the neighborhood. At 81, he remained mentally sharp and physically active, but his cardiovascular system had been showing signs of strain that he'd characteristically downplayed or ignored entirely. The intensive care unit at Hartford General became my second home over the following weeks. I'd arrive before dawn, spend an hour with Benjamin before heading to work, then return immediately after office hours, and remain until the nursing staff politely but firmly insisted that visiting hours had concluded. Catherine came frequently, bringing fresh flowers from her garden and books she thought might interest him during his recovery. Michael and Jake made appearances that became noticeably more frequent and extended, as doctors confirmed that Benjamin's condition was unlikely to improve significantly. "The vultures are beginning their descent," Benjamin whispered to me one evening, his voice weak but his mind still razor-sharp as he nodded toward the doorway where Michael and his brother Philip had just concluded what they described as a, quote, routine family visit, but which had clearly involved discussion of business matters and future arrangements. "Don't exhaust yourself with cynical thoughts," I said gently, adjusting his pillows to make him more comfortable. "Focus your energy on healing and getting stronger." His pale blue eyes, still bright despite his body's deterioration, fixed on mine with startling intensity. "Sarah, I've built a successful enterprise by seeing situations clearly and honestly. Allow me to apply that same clarity to my current circumstances." During those 3 weeks of uncertainty, Benjamin's hospital room transformed into a revolving door of family members who hadn't bothered visiting him in months or even years. Second cousins from distant states suddenly appeared with flowers and concerned expressions. Nieces and nephews who'd rarely returned phone calls materialized with elaborate stories about travel schedules and prior commitments that had prevented earlier visits. Even Margaret, Philip's wife, who had accused Benjamin of manipulating a business deal to cheat her husband 15 years earlier, arrived with a carefully rehearsed apology and homemade cookies. I began noticing hushed conversations in the hospital corridors, poorly disguised discussions about funeral arrangements, estate planning, and the future of Morrison Industries. Michael started bringing legal documents for Benjamin to review, claiming they were urgent business matters requiring immediate attention, despite the fact that Benjamin had officially retired from active management 3 years earlier. "He's attempting to secure his position while I'm vulnerable," Benjamin confided during one of our private moments when the nurses had cleared the room for his physical therapy session. Michael has always panicked when he feels uncertain about his future security. On a particularly difficult evening when Benjamin's oxygen levels had dropped dangerously low and the medical team was discussing emergency interventions, he asked the staff to give us privacy for what he said might be our final conversation. "Sarah, I need you to understand something fundamental," he said, reaching for my hand with surprising strength given his weakened condition. "I've spent my entire life observing people carefully. Michael, Jake, all of them. I understand their motivations, their character flaws, their fundamental nature, and I understand yours as well. What do you see in me?" I asked, genuinely curious about his assessment. "Your strength, your unwavering integrity, the fact that you've never once asked me for financial assistance or special favors, even when I would have gladly provided them." He paused to catch his breath, the effort of speaking clearly exhausting him. "I've developed 2 separate plans for handling my estate. Michael will fight the first one aggressively. You must allow him to believe he's achieved victory." "I don't understand what you mean," I admitted, confused by his cryptic references to multiple plans. "For ensure that my life's work continues according to my actual intentions," he explained slowly. "For making certain that my legacy serves the purposes I've always intended, rather than feeding the entitlement and poor judgment that have characterized Michael's approach to responsibility." He squeezed my hand with more force than I'd expected. "Promise me you'll trust the process completely, even when circumstances appear to be falling apart around you." I promised, though his meaning remained unclear to me. Later that same night, I overheard Michael and Philip talking in the hallway outside Benjamin's room, their voices carrying further than they'd probably intended. "Benjamin has always been traditional about succession planning," Philip was saying with confidence. The company will naturally pass to you as his eldest son and designated heir. It had better, Michael replied, his tone combining resentment with entitlement. I've endured his constant criticism and micromanagement for over 2 decades. It's finally my turn to run things according to my own vision. The next morning, Benjamin requested a private meeting with his attorney, Harrison Webb, who had handled the family's legal affairs for nearly 15 years. Their conference lasted almost 3 hours, and when I returned from grabbing lunch in the hospital cafeteria, Benjamin appeared more peaceful than he'd been since his admission. Everything is properly arranged now, he told me with a satisfied smile. Now we can simply enjoy whatever time we have remaining together. For the next several days, that's exactly what we did. I brought photo albums from his house, and we spent hours reminiscing about family vacations to the mountains, company milestone celebrations, and those countless Thursday evening conversations that had shaped my understanding of business ethics and personal responsibility. Sometimes he'd drift into sleep mid-conversation, but he always woke with a gentle smile when he noticed me still sitting beside his bed, reading or working on laptop projects that I could complete from his room. On what would turn out to be his final night, something felt fundamentally different about the atmosphere. The room seemed quieter somehow, as if the outside world had already begun receding from his consciousness. I sat holding his hand, occasionally dabbing his forehead with a cool washcloth, when fever made him restless. "Sarah," he said suddenly, his voice clearer than it had been in several days. "Do you remember when you were 9 and fell off the dock at the lake house during that thunderstorm?" I nodded, surprised that his mind had drifted to that particular memory. I was terrified of swimming in deep water for months afterward. "You didn't cry, even though you were bleeding from the scrapes and genuinely frightened," he continued. "You allowed Catherine to clean and bandage your injuries. Then you went right back out to that dock an hour later and jumped in again." I wanted to prove the accident hadn't made me afraid, I remembered. "No," he corrected gently. "You wanted to prove to yourself that one bad experience wouldn't define your relationship with something you'd previously enjoyed. That kind of resilience is extraordinarily rare." His eyes drifted toward the window where dawn was just beginning to lighten the November sky. "Remember that quality in the challenging days ahead." Those were the last coherent words Benjamin spoke to me. I remained alone with him when he passed peacefully the following morning, just as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in a week. The family's performance at Benjamin's funeral was exactly the theatrical display I'd anticipated. Michael suddenly transformed into the grieving son who had allegedly maintained a close relationship with his father throughout their complicated history. Jake played the role of the devoted grandson who had supposedly learned invaluable business lessons during his brief and problematic tenure at Morrison Industries. Aunt Margaret dabbed at completely dry eyes with an expensive handkerchief, while whispering complaints about the catering arrangements to anyone within earshot. I stood apart from their orchestrated grief, my sorrow genuine and overwhelming. Benjamin hadn't simply been my grandfather. He'd served as my mentor, my closest friend, and the parental figure who'd consistently believed in my potential when others dismissed or ignored it. The only person at the service who seemed to share my authentic mourning was Harrison Webb, who positioned himself respectfully at the back of the chapel, his own eyes noticeably red-rimmed during the eulogy. "Your grandfather was truly one of a kind," Harrison told me quietly at the reception afterward, his voice thick with emotion. "They simply don't make men of his caliber and integrity anymore." The days following the funeral brought an escalation in Michael's anxiety about the upcoming will reading, which Harrison had scheduled for the following Friday afternoon. I overheard Michael on multiple phone calls with his financial advisor, making premature plans for restructuring various assets and investments. "By next week, we'll have complete control over the situation," he assured Jake during a dinner conversation 3 days before the reading. "The company's stock alone is valued at over $300 million. We'll need to consolidate operations immediately and streamline the management structure." Catherine caught my eye across the dining room table, her expression carefully neutral, but her concern evident to anyone who knew her well. Later that evening, she came to my bedroom as I was preparing to return to my apartment. "Sarah, whatever happens on Friday, remember that sudden wealth changes people in unexpected ways," she said softly. "Sometimes it reveals character traits that were always present but hidden beneath the surface." I nodded, assuming she was warning me about Michael and Jake's likely behavior. Only later would I realize she might have been cautioning me about my own potential transformation as well. The night before the reading, sleep eluded me completely. I sat on my apartment balcony, looking up at the stars that Benjamin had taught me to identify during our lake house weekends, thinking about all the lessons he'd shared regarding values, priorities, and what truly matters when everything else falls away. I found myself whispering to the darkness. It was never about the money. It could never be just about the money. With that thought providing some measure of peace, I finally managed a few hours of restless sleep, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake that awaited our family the next afternoon. Benjamin's home office had always been an impressive space that reflected his personality and achievements. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with business biographies, economic theory texts, and classic literature. The massive walnut desk, where he'd built his empire, dominated the center of the room, surrounded by comfortable leather furniture that invited long conversations and thoughtful deliberation. With 16 family members crowded into the space, the room felt claustrophobic and charged with tension. Michael had positioned himself in Benjamin's executive chair, a presumptuous move that drew a subtle but disapproving frown from Harrison Webb. Catherine sat elegantly beside him in a simple black dress, her face maintaining the practiced neutrality she'd perfected over decades of family gatherings. Jake slouched against the bookcase with studied casualness, though his constantly checking his expensive watch betrayed his nervous anticipation. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Philip occupied the leather sofa, sitting stiffly upright as if posture could somehow influence the proceedings in their favor. Cousins Rebecca, Timothy, and Jennifer had been relegated to dining room chairs brought in for the occasion, their discomfort evident in both their awkward positioning and anxious expressions. Benjamin's sister Florence, now 88 and requiring assistance from her live-in nurse, claimed the room's single armchair, her sharp eyes still alert despite her advanced age. I chose a position near the tall windows, where afternoon sunlight warmed my back and I could observe everyone's reactions without being the center of attention. As Harrison arranged his documents on the desk, he politely but firmly requested that Michael vacate the chair so the proceedings could be conducted properly according to legal protocol. Before we begin, Harrison announced once everyone had settled into their positions, I want to establish clearly that Benjamin was of completely sound mind when these arrangements were finalized. 2 independent physicians examined him thoroughly and confirmed his cognitive clarity and decision-making capacity. These documents have been properly executed according to Connecticut state law, with all appropriate witnesses and notarizations. They are legally binding and absolutely incontestable. Harrison's pointed look at Michael while delivering this statement suggested he'd anticipated potential challenges to the will's validity. Michael's jaw tightened visibly, but he remained silent. Harrison began with the smaller bequests, reading each provision in his clear, professional voice. To each member of the household staff who has served faithfully for more than 5 years, I leave the sum of $15,000. The housekeeping and groundskeeping staff members present smiled gratefully at this recognition of their loyal service. To Yale University, my alma mater, I leave $200,000 to establish the Benjamin Morrison Scholarship Fund for students from low-income families pursuing business degrees. To the Connecticut Historical Society, I leave my collection of Civil War memorabilia and historical documents, which I hope will be preserved for future generations to study and appreciate. To my sister Florence, Harrison continued, his voice softening with genuine affection, I leave my summer cottage on Lake George and an annual annuity of $100,000 for the remainder of her life, with gratitude for a lifetime of wisdom and companionship. Florence nodded with quiet dignity, unsurprised by Benjamin's generosity. Their relationship had remained strong and affectionate throughout their long lives, unmarred by the conflicts that had plagued other family connections. To my nephews and nieces, Harrison read, I leave $50,000 each, with an additional $75,000 to any who have completed college degrees and are currently employed in careers that contribute positively to their communities. Cousins Rebecca and Timothy exchanged meaningful glances, both having recently graduated from college and begun careers in education and social work respectively. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, having dropped out of college to pursue various unsuccessful artistic endeavors that had been funded primarily by family money. To my son Michael's wife Catherine, Harrison's voice took on a warmer tone, I leave my collection of American Impressionist paintings, which she has always appreciated more deeply and knowledgeably than anyone else in the family, along with $750,000 to be used entirely at her discretion. Catherine's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, her eyes widening in surprise before she quickly regained control. Michael's hand moved possessively to rest on her knee, as if claiming ownership over her unexpected inheritance. To my grandson Jake, Harrison continued, causing Jake to straighten up from his casual pose against the bookcase. I leave $2 million to be held in trust until his 32nd birthday, with quarterly distributions of interest only until that time. Additionally, I leave him my vintage motorcycle collection, with the stipulation that none of the vehicles may be sold for a period of 15 years. Jake's expression revealed a complex mixture of satisfaction and calculation. $2 million represented substantial wealth, but clearly less than he'd expected based on his assumptions about family hierarchy and traditional inheritance patterns. Harrison paused deliberately, taking a sip of water from the glass Catherine had thoughtfully provided. The tension in the room had become almost palpable, as everyone realized that the major assets, the company's shares, the primary estate, and the bulk of liquid investments, remained unaddressed. Regarding Morrison Industries, Harrison announced, causing Michael to lean forward so eagerly he nearly slipped from his chair, the company which Benjamin built from nothing and which represented his life's primary achievement. Michael was practically vibrating with anticipation, his hands trembling slightly as he waited for confirmation of what he'd assumed was his birthright. I have determined that 60% of voting shares will be placed in an irrevocable trust with specific operational directives to be followed by the appointed trustees. The remaining 40% of company shares, Harrison paused, allowing the suspense to build naturally, are hereby bequeathed to my granddaughter Sarah Morrison. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to absorb sound itself. I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me, but I kept my gaze fixed steadily on Harrison, certain I must have misunderstood his words. The bulk of my liquid assets, real estate holdings, and investment portfolio, Harrison continued in the same measured tone, totaling approximately $38 million, are also bequeathed to Sarah with the following condition. Sarah must demonstrate continued financial responsibility and sound judgment for a period of 18 months, during which time these assets will be managed by the executors of my estate. After this period, assuming the conditions are met satisfactorily, Sarah will receive complete control. Michael's face had progressed through several alarming color changes, finally settling on a deep crimson that suggested dangerously elevated blood pressure. This is completely absurd, he exploded, standing so abruptly that his chair crashed backward into the bookshelf. I am his son, his only son. I've worked alongside him for over 25 years. Harrison remained professionally calm despite Michael's outburst. If you'll allow me to finish the reading, Michael, there is a specific explanation from your father regarding these decisions. I don't need to hear his rationalizations, Michael shouted, his voice echoing off the office walls. This is manipulation from beyond the grave. He's trying to control us even after death. Michael, Catherine said quietly but firmly, please sit down and allow Harrison to complete the reading. In explanation of these decisions, Harrison continued once Michael had grudgingly righted his chair and sat down, his anger still radiating throughout the room. Benjamin left these specific words. I have observed Sarah develop into a person of unwavering integrity, exceptional intelligence, and genuine compassion, the three qualities most essential for proper stewardship of wealth and responsibility. She has proven herself not by seeking my approval or assistance, but by forging her own path and maintaining her principles even when doing so was difficult or unpopular. These are the qualities needed to ensure Morrison Industries continues to thrive, and that my legacy is used for meaningful positive impact rather than personal gratification. The profound silence that followed Benjamin's recorded words felt heavy with shock, resentment, and disbelief. I experienced a complex whirlwind of emotions: surprise, gratitude, grief, and an almost overwhelming sense of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. This is complete bullshit, Jake finally erupted, breaking the stunned silence that had engulfed the room. She manipulated him when he was sick and vulnerable in that hospital. Sarah barely spent any meaningful time with him until he got sick, Michael added, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his earlier shouting. Meanwhile, I devoted my entire adult life to that company. Harrison sighed deeply, clearly having anticipated these exact accusations. If I may point out some factual corrections, Michael, according to Morrison Industries security logs, Sarah visited your father at his office for lunch every Friday throughout her college years and maintained weekly phone contact, even after accepting employment with a competing firm. The hospital visitation records also indicate she spent more time with Benjamin during his illness than all other family members combined. Michael stood again, this time moving purposefully toward the desk where Harrison had placed the ceremonial oversized check made out to me for $38 million. A symbolic representation of the inheritance that would actually be transferred through proper financial institutions and legal channels. "This is not going to happen," Michael declared, his voice filled with finality as he snatched the check from the desk's polished surface. "My father was clearly not in his right mind, regardless of what your hired medical experts claim." "Michael," Harrison warned, rising from his chair with concern evident in his voice, "destroying that check will not alter the legal validity of the will or change the actual inheritance transfers." But Michael had already retrieved his vintage Zippo lighter from his jacket pocket, the same gold-plated lighter that Benjamin had given him for his 40th birthday, engraved with the Morrison family crest. With theatrical flourish worthy of a Broadway drama, he flicked the lighter open and set the corner of the oversized check ablaze. "There," he announced with savage satisfaction as the paper began to curl and blacken from the flames. "This is exactly what I think of this ridiculous farce of a will." Everyone in the room watched in various states of shock and horror as the check burned, the flames consuming the printed numbers that represented more money than most people would see in several lifetimes. Everyone except me. Because while they witnessed what appeared to be a fortune literally going up in smoke, I remembered Benjamin's cryptic words from his hospital bed with perfect clarity. "I've developed two separate plans. Michael will fight the first one aggressively. You must allow him to believe he's achieved victory." And so I smiled. A small, quiet smile that seemed to confuse and disturb everyone in that tension-filled room, even more than the dramatic destruction they'd just witnessed. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Jake hissed at me, his voice filled with disbelief and something approaching panic. "He just burned $38 million. "Mr. Webb," I said calmly, completely ignoring my brother's outburst while maintaining my focus on the attorney. "I believe my grandfather mentioned there was also a video message he wanted us to see. Something about speaking to the family one final time." Michael dropped the smoldering remnants of the check into Benjamin's antique wastebasket, his moment of triumph already beginning to fade as he registered my complete lack of distress or devastation. "What are you talking about?" he demanded suspiciously. "What video message?" Harrison checked his watch with deliberate precision. "Yes, there is indeed a video message to be played only after the completion of the will reading. I believe this would be the appropriate time to view it." As Harrison began setting up his laptop and portable projector, Michael's newfound confidence visibly wavered. He kept glancing at me with increasingly suspicious eyes, trying to decipher why I wasn't weeping or raging, or showing any of the expected reactions to having just watched my inheritance burn to ashes. The family slowly repositioned themselves to face the white wall where Harrison projected the video file. Benjamin's face appeared on the makeshift screen, clearly recorded in his hospital room, but on a day when he'd been particularly alert and lucid. The sight of him looking so unmistakably himself, despite the hospital gown and medical equipment visible in the background, brought immediate tears to my eyes. "Hello, my dear family," Benjamin began, his voice strong and clear despite his physical weakness. "If you're watching this message, then the will reading has been completed, and you've heard my final decisions regarding the distribution of my estate." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly not liking the direction this posthumous communication might take. "I want to address some concerns that certain family members may be experiencing," Benjamin continued, his piercing blue eyes seeming to look directly at each person in the room. "Michael, I know you're angry. You've probably accused Sarah of manipulation or undue influence. You may have even taken some dramatic action to express your displeasure with my decisions." Michael's face went pale as Benjamin seemed to predict his exact behavior with unsettling accuracy. "Let me be absolutely clear about something," Benjamin said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone we all remembered from his business dealings. "Sarah never asked me for anything. Not once in her entire life did she request money, special treatment, or preferential consideration. Every accomplishment she achieved was earned through her own intelligence, determination, and integrity." Benjamin paused, coughing slightly before continuing. "I made my inheritance decisions based on careful observation of character, values, and demonstrated judgment over many years. Michael, your resentment and sense of entitlement have clouded your judgment for decades. Jake, your willingness to take shortcuts and compromise ethics for personal gain disqualifies you from stewardship responsibilities." Jake slumped further into his chair, his earlier bravado completely deflated by his grandfather's posthumous assessment. "Sarah represents the qualities I most hope to see continue in the next generation," Benjamin explained. "Her commitment to earning her own way, her refusal to exploit family connections for personal advantage, and her unwavering ethical standards make her the obvious choice to carry forward my legacy." The camera angle shifted slightly as Benjamin adjusted his position in the hospital bed. "Now, for those who may be concerned about the practical implications of my decisions, let me provide some clarification. The inheritance I've left to Sarah has already been secured through legal channels that were completed weeks before my passing." Michael's head snapped up, his expression shifting from smugness to alarm. "The check that was read during today's proceedings was purely symbolic," Benjamin continued with what appeared to be slight amusement. "The actual financial transfers were executed through irrevocable trusts, offshore accounts, and investment vehicles that are completely protected from any potential legal challenges or emotional outbursts." Harrison paused the video and turned to address the room. "What your father is explaining is that the funds and assets have already been legally transferred to Sarah through mechanisms that were finalized before Benjamin's death. Any attempts to contest the will or challenge the inheritance are essentially meaningless because the assets are no longer part of the estate." Michael's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, realization, and finally a rage so intense it seemed to transform his features into something almost unrecognizable. "So the will reading was a test," I said quietly, understanding flooding through me. "He wanted to see how everyone would react when faced with his true intentions." "More accurately, it was a revelation," Harrison corrected diplomatically. "Your grandfather hoped his family would respond with grace and acceptance, but he prepared for alternative scenarios." Benjamin's voice resumed from the speakers as Harrison restarted the video. "For Sarah, who I know is watching this with mixed emotions, I want you to understand that this inheritance comes with both tremendous opportunity and significant responsibility. Money is just a tool. Use it wisely, use it kindly, and most importantly, use it in ways that create positive change in the world." His expression softened with unmistakable affection. "I'm proud of the woman you've become, not because of any achievements or successes, but because of your character. Your integrity, your compassion, your willingness to stand firm in your principles, even when it's difficult. These are the true wealth I'm passing on to you." The video concluded with Benjamin's final words. "Remember that the greatest inheritance anyone can receive is not money or property, but the knowledge that someone believed in them completely. Use that confidence to build something meaningful that will outlast us all." As the screen went dark, the room remained silent, except for the soft sound of Catherine quietly weeping. The emotional impact of hearing Benjamin's voice again, combined with the revelation that the inheritance had been secured regardless of Michael's theatrical destruction, left everyone struggling to process the new reality. Michael sat frozen in his chair, staring at the empty wastebasket where the ashes of the ceremonial check had settled into gray dust. His grand gesture of defiance had been rendered completely meaningless, a fact that was clearly dawning on him with devastating clarity. Jake appeared to be in shock, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something approaching genuine remorse as Benjamin's words about shortcuts and compromised ethics echoed in the silence. "So what happens now?" Aunt Margaret finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now Sarah has some important decisions to make about her future," Harrison replied, closing his laptop with finality. "But those decisions don't need to be made immediately." Benjamin structured the inheritance to provide time for careful consideration and planning. I looked around the room at my family members, seeing them clearly perhaps for the first time. Michael, deflated and humiliated by the failure of his dramatic gesture. Jake, forced to confront the reality of his own character flaws. Catherine, proud but concerned about the family dynamics that would inevitably follow. The extended family members, disappointed by their own modest inheritances but unable to argue with Benjamin's generosity. "I think we all need some time to process what's happened today," I said finally, standing to indicate that I was ready to leave. "This has been emotional for everyone." As I walked toward the door, Michael called after me, his voice hollow with defeat. "You knew, didn't you? You knew he'd already secured everything." I paused at the threshold, considering my response carefully. What I knew was that Benjamin always kept his promises, and he promised me that I should trust the process, even when things appeared to be falling apart. The late afternoon sun felt warm on my face as I stepped outside Benjamin's house, carrying with me the weight of my new responsibilities and the profound satisfaction of watching justice unfold exactly as he'd orchestrated it. The weeks following the will reading unfolded like watching dominoes fall in carefully planned succession. Benjamin's masterful orchestration continued to reveal itself through a series of events that demonstrated just how thoroughly he'd anticipated every possible reaction and consequence. 3 days after Michael's dramatic display with the ceremonial check, Harrison Webb called to schedule a private meeting at his downtown law office. The building itself spoke of old money and established credibility, marble floors worn smooth by decades of important footsteps, mahogany paneling that had witnessed countless family fortunes change hands, and oil paintings of distinguished gentlemen whose stern expressions seemed to judge every decision made within these walls. "Sarah, your grandfather left specific instructions for this conversation," Harrison began, settling behind his imposing desk with a thick manila folder. "He wanted you to understand the full scope of what he's entrusted to you, but also the mechanisms he put in place to protect both you and his legacy." The folder contained documents that took my breath away, asset portfolios spanning 3 decades of careful investment. Real estate holdings in 7 states that I hadn't even known existed. Technology investments that Benjamin had made years before most people understood their potential. Charitable foundations already established in my name, waiting for my guidance and direction. "The Morrison Industries shares you inherited represent more than just company ownership," Harrison explained, spreading financial statements across the polished conference table. "Your grandfather restructured the board of directors 6 months before his death. The 60% held in trust is managed by 3 independent professionals who share his business philosophy and ethical standards. As the 40% owner, you have substantial influence but can't be pressured into decisions that compromise the company's values." My hands trembled slightly as I examined the paperwork that represented Benjamin's life work. He really thought of everything, didn't he? "More than you might realize," Harrison replied with a knowing smile. Benjamin anticipated that certain family members might attempt legal challenges, emotional manipulation, or even more desperate measures to contest his decisions. Every document here has been structured to withstand any conceivable attack. The most ingenious aspect of Benjamin's planning became clear as Harrison explained the timeline. The inheritance transfers had been executed 3 weeks before Benjamin's death, during a period when multiple witnesses could testify to his complete mental clarity. The ceremonial will reading had been purely theatrical, a way to reveal true character while the actual legal and financial arrangements remained untouchable. "Your father and brother have already contacted 2 different law firms about potential challenges," Harrison informed me matter-of-factly. "Both firms declined representation after reviewing the documentation. The inheritance is absolutely bulletproof from a legal standpoint." But Benjamin's foresight extended beyond legal protections. The folder contained detailed recommendations for financial advisors, investment strategies, and even specific charities that aligned with causes we discussed during our Thursday evening conversations. He'd created a roadmap for responsible wealth management that would allow me to honor his values while developing my own philanthropic vision. "There's one more element your grandfather wanted you to consider," Harrison said, producing a sealed envelope with my name written in Benjamin's familiar handwriting. "This contains his thoughts about your family relationships moving forward. He asked that you read it only after understanding the full scope of your inheritance." I carefully opened the envelope, immediately recognizing Benjamin's precise penmanship despite the slight tremor that had developed during his illness. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this letter, then the inheritance process has been completed, and you now understand the full extent of the responsibility I've placed on your shoulders. I want you to know that this decision was made with complete confidence in your character and capabilities. However, I'm also aware that sudden wealth can strain family relationships in ways that money can never repair. Your father and brother will likely struggle with resentment and feelings of rejection. This is not your fault, nor is it your responsibility to fix their emotional responses to my decisions. I encourage you to maintain family connections where possible, but never at the expense of your own integrity or well-being. Some relationships may heal with time, while others may require distance for everyone's peace of mind. Trust your instincts about which category each person falls into. Most importantly, remember that wealth is a tool, not a destination. Use it to create opportunities for others, to solve problems that matter to you, and to build something meaningful that will outlast your own lifetime. The specific choices are yours to make, but the obligation to make them thoughtfully is non-negotiable. With all my love and unwavering faith in your judgment, Benjamin." Reading his words brought both comfort and an almost overwhelming sense of responsibility. Benjamin had given me not just financial security, but the freedom to make a genuine difference in the world. The question was how to begin. My first priority became establishing clear boundaries with family members, who might view my inheritance as a solution to their own financial problems or career disappointments. This necessity became apparent when Jake appeared at my apartment 2 weeks after the will reading, his usual arrogance replaced by something resembling desperation. "Sarah, we need to talk about the company," he said, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. "With the trust arrangement and your ownership stake, you basically control Morrison Industries now. I think we should discuss how I can contribute to the family business." The transformation in Jake's attitude was both remarkable and transparent. The brother who had mocked my principles and called integrity nonsense was now presenting himself as a reformed character eager to embrace the values he'd previously dismissed. "Jake, your employment at Morrison Industries ended when the internal audit discovered misappropriated funds," I reminded him gently but firmly. "Those actions demonstrated a fundamental incompatibility with the company's ethical standards." "That was just a misunderstanding about expense policies," he insisted, his desperation becoming more evident. "I've learned from those mistakes. I could start in a junior position, prove myself again, work my way back up through merit." His willingness to accept a subordinate role after years of expecting special treatment might have seemed like genuine growth, except for the calculating look in his eyes. Jake wasn't experiencing a character transformation. He was simply recalibrating his strategy for accessing what he viewed as family wealth. "I think you should focus on building your own career independent of Morrison Industries," I suggested diplomatically. "Benjamin left you a substantial inheritance that provides plenty of opportunity for investment or starting your own business." Jake's mask slipped completely at that suggestion. $2 million isn't enough to maintain the lifestyle I've grown accustomed to," he snapped, revealing his true priorities. "You inherited nearly $40 million plus company control. Family members should support each other." "Support, yes. Enable irresponsible behavior, no," I replied calmly. Benjamin made his inheritance decisions based on demonstrated character and judgment. Those same criteria apply to any future business relationships. After Jake left, slamming my apartment door with the petulant force of a frustrated child, I realized that Benjamin's letter had already proven prophetic. Some family relationships would require distance for everyone's well-being. Michael's approach was more sophisticated, but equally transparent. Rather than direct confrontation, he began a campaign of subtle emotional manipulation designed to make me question Benjamin's decisions and my own worthiness to inherit his legacy. I've been thinking about what Father really would have wanted, he said during a family dinner that Catherine had organized to maintain family unity despite the recent tensions. He always valued family loyalty above individual achievement. I think his illness might have clouded his judgment about what would truly honor his memory. Catherine shot him a warning look, but Michael continued his carefully orchestrated presentation. Sarah, you're still young and focused on your own career. Managing a major inheritance and company ownership requires experience and connections that take decades to develop. Perhaps we should consider restructuring the arrangements to better reflect Father's true intentions. The suggestion that I was too inexperienced and immature to handle my inheritance might have been insulting if it weren't so obviously desperate. Michael was positioning himself as the wise elder who could guide me toward better decisions that would coincidentally benefit him substantially. I appreciate your concern about my readiness for these responsibilities, I responded diplomatically. That's exactly why Benjamin structured the inheritance with professional trustees and advisors to provide guidance during the transition period. Professional advisors don't understand our family dynamics or the personal relationships that drive successful business operations, Michael pressed. Morrison Industries has always been a family enterprise. Father may have lost sight of that fundamental principle during his illness. Catherine intervened before I could respond. Michael, Benjamin was completely lucid when he made these decisions. Multiple medical professionals confirmed his mental capacity, suggesting otherwise dishonors his memory. The dinner concluded in uncomfortable silence, but Michael's strategy became clear. He intended to position himself as the reasonable family patriarch, who could help me avoid the mistakes that might result from my inexperience and Benjamin's supposedly compromised judgment. Over the following weeks, I received similar approaches from various family members who suddenly discovered urgent financial needs or brilliant business opportunities that would benefit from my newfound resources. Cousin Rebecca wanted funding for an art gallery that would, quote, honor Benjamin's cultural interests. Uncle Philip presented an investment opportunity in commercial real estate that he claimed would, Even Aunt Margaret suggested that I purchase a vacation property where the whole family could gather to maintain our connections. Each request was presented as a way to honor Benjamin's memory or strengthen family bonds. But the underlying message was consistent. My inheritance should be viewed as a family resource rather than an individual responsibility. The most telling moment came when Jennifer, the cousin who had dropped out of college for unsuccessful artistic pursuits, called to invite me to lunch at an expensive restaurant she clearly couldn't afford. I've been thinking about Benjamin's values and what he really stood for, she began after ordering the most expensive items on the menu. He always believed in supporting family members who were pursuing meaningful creative work. Jennifer's meaningful creative work consisted primarily of expensive art supplies and studio space funded by family money, with no completed projects or demonstrated talent to justify the ongoing investment. I'm developing a multimedia installation about inherited wealth and family responsibility, she continued with remarkable shamelessness. It would be a perfect way to explore the themes Benjamin cared about while creating something beautiful that honors his memory. The irony was breathtaking. Jennifer wanted me to fund an art project about inherited wealth, while demonstrating exactly the kind of entitled thinking that had motivated Benjamin's careful inheritance planning. That sounds like an interesting concept, I replied diplomatically. You should definitely pursue grant funding from arts organizations that support experimental multimedia work. But family funding would allow much more creative freedom, she pressed. Benjamin would have wanted his legacy to support artistic expression that challenges social conventions about money and power. As I listened to Jennifer's elaborate justification for why I should finance her artistic exploration of wealth inheritance, I realized that Benjamin's true genius lay not just in his financial planning, but in his understanding of human nature. He had anticipated exactly these conversations, these justifications, these attempts to reframe personal greed as family obligation or artistic expression. The inheritance had revealed everyone's true character with surgical precision. Jake's entitled desperation. Michael's manipulative paternalism. Jennifer's creative rationalization of her financial dependence. Each family member had responded to the changed circumstances by showing me exactly who they really were beneath their carefully maintained facades. But the inheritance had also revealed something else: the profound loneliness that comes with sudden wealth, and the realization that many relationships you'd assumed were based on genuine affection might actually have been influenced by financial considerations you'd never recognized. As I sat in my apartment that evening, surrounded by documents that represented more money than I'd ever imagined possessing, I understood why Benjamin had chosen his Thursday evening ice cream conversations to share his most important lessons about values and priorities. He'd been preparing me for exactly this moment, when financial security would force me to distinguish between relationships based on authentic connection and those motivated by self-interest. The question now was how to use his gift wisely while honoring both his memory and my own principles. The real work was just beginning. The morning I officially took control of my inheritance, I stood in Benjamin's former office at Morrison Industries, now mine according to the legal documents spread across the mahogany desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same room where Michael had presumed to sit in Benjamin's chair during the will reading was now my rightful domain. But unlike Michael's territorial posturing, I felt the weight of genuine responsibility settling into my bones. Harrison Webb had arranged the final transfer ceremony with characteristic precision. The trust period had concluded exactly 18 months after Benjamin's death, and the independent evaluators had unanimously confirmed that I'd demonstrated the financial responsibility and sound judgment Benjamin had required. Every investment decision I'd made, every charitable contribution I'd initiated, every business strategy I'd developed had been scrutinized and approved. "Your grandfather would be extraordinarily proud," Harrison said as he handed me the final signature pages that would complete the transfer. "You've exceeded even his highest expectations for stewardship and vision." The 18 months had transformed me in ways I never could have anticipated. Working alongside the professional trustees, I'd learned to think strategically about wealth not as personal possessions, but as resources that could create ripple effects across generations. The girl who had once sat in that corner booth eating ice cream while Benjamin explained business ethics had evolved into someone capable of making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and thousands of community members. My first major decision had been establishing the Morrison Foundation with an initial endowment of $12 million. Rather than scattering donations across popular causes, I'd focused on systemic issues that Benjamin had cared about deeply: educational opportunities for low-income students, small business development in underserved communities, and environmental sustainability in residential construction. The Foundation's signature program provided comprehensive support for first-generation college students, covering not just tuition but also housing, textbooks, mentorship, and career placement services. Benjamin had often spoken about the barriers that prevented talented young people from accessing higher education, and I'd designed the program to eliminate every possible obstacle between potential and opportunity. Working with Morrison Industries' construction division, I'd also initiated a revolutionary affordable housing project that incorporated Benjamin's environmental values with modern sustainability technology. Solar panels, energy-efficient insulation, and smart home systems made these homes both environmentally responsible and economically advantageous for working families. The waiting list had grown to over 3,000 applicants within 6 months of announcement. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my new role was the gradual restoration of Morrison Industries' company culture. Under Michael's brief leadership, employee morale had plummeted as cost-cutting measures prioritized short-term profits over long-term sustainability. I'd reversed those policies immediately, reinstating the profit-sharing program Benjamin had established decades earlier, and creating new professional development opportunities that honored employees' individual growth aspirations. The quarterly board meetings had become collaborative sessions where innovative ideas flourished instead of defensive presentations, where managers feared criticism. Employee retention rates improved dramatically, and productivity increased as people felt valued and heard, rather than merely utilized. My relationship with Michael had evolved into something resembling professional courtesy, though personal warmth remained elusive. He'd eventually accepted a consulting position with another development firm, where his experience provided value without the emotional complications of family dynamics. We exchanged polite greetings at Catherine's carefully orchestrated holiday gatherings, but the easy relationship we'd never really shared seemed permanently out of reach. Jake had surprised everyone by using his trust fund to purchase a small restaurant in downtown Hartford, where his natural charisma and genuine enthusiasm for hospitality had finally found appropriate expression. Without the pressure of living up to Benjamin's business legacy, he'd discovered talents and interests that had been overshadowed by family expectations. We'd managed to rebuild something approaching sibling affection, though it remained cautious and somewhat formal. Catherine had become my closest family ally, using her inheritance to establish a small but prestigious art gallery that showcased emerging local artists alongside established masters. Her combination of financial independence and cultural sophistication had blossomed into something beautiful and meaningful. We met regularly for lunch, sharing updates about our respective projects and maintaining the kind of relationship I'd always hoped to have with family members. The most unexpected development had been my romantic relationship with David Chen, the son of the lawyer Benjamin had mentioned during our childhood walks downtown. David had inherited his father's commitment to social justice, but channeled it through environmental law, working with nonprofit organizations to hold corporations accountable for ecological damage. We'd met at a sustainability conference where I was presenting Morrison Industries' green building initiatives. David appreciated my inherited wealth without being intimidated or overly impressed by it. He understood that money was a tool for creating positive change rather than a measure of personal worth. More importantly, he shared Benjamin's values about integrity, community service, and using privilege responsibly. Our Thursday evening dinners had become reminiscent of those childhood ice cream conversations, thoughtful discussions about making meaningful contributions to the world around us. 5 years after Benjamin's death, I stood again in that same office, but this time I wasn't alone. David was reviewing environmental impact assessments for our latest housing development, while Catherine examined photographs of the artwork we'd commissioned for the Morrison Foundation's new headquarters. The three of us represented a different kind of family, one chosen through shared values rather than inherited through genetic coincidence. On my desk sat a framed photograph from last Thursday evening, Benjamin and me at the ice cream parlor when I was 12 years old, both of us laughing at something he'd said about the importance of finding joy in simple pleasures. Beside it lay the latest quarterly report showing Morrison Industries' record profits alongside its unprecedented environmental awards and employee satisfaction ratings. Benjamin's legacy hadn't just survived the transition, it had flourished beyond his most optimistic projections. The company he'd built from nothing continued creating meaningful value for employees, customers, and communities. The fortune he'd entrusted to me was generating positive change that would ripple forward for generations. But perhaps most importantly, the lessons he'd shared during those Thursday evening conversations had proven more valuable than any financial inheritance. The understanding that true wealth lies in relationships, integrity, and purpose had guided every major decision I'd made. The knowledge that success means creating something meaningful that outlasts your own lifetime had shaped my vision for the future. As the sun set through the tall windows of what had once been Benjamin's office, I felt his presence not as a memory, but as a continuing influence. Every choice I made honored his faith in my character. Every success I achieved validated his confidence in my judgment. Every challenge I faced was met with principles he'd helped me develop during those formative conversations. The inheritance he'd left me wasn't just money or property or company shares. It was the certainty that someone had believed in me completely, and the responsibility to use that confidence to build something beautiful and lasting. That was a legacy worth more than any amount that could be printed on a ceremonial check, even one worth $38 million. Outside, the lights of Hartford twinkled like possibilities waiting to be explored. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to honor Benjamin's memory through meaningful action. But tonight I sat contentedly in the office where it all began, surrounded by the people who mattered most, carrying forward a legacy built on love, integrity, and unwavering faith in the power of good people to create positive change in the world. The story that began with a father burning a check in anger had transformed into something far more valuable, a testament to the enduring power of character, the importance of principled leadership, and the beautiful possibility that wealth, when guided by wisdom and compassion, can become a force for genuine good in the world. And somewhere, I knew Benjamin was smiling. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.